And now we close out the third and final section of this video on the appeal to scholars. In this section, we will look at a few other scholars, and I mean actual flesh and blood university professors, not mere figments of someone's imagination. Now, in my case, I just wanted to discuss the markings on the pews. I'm fine with others inviting scholars to weigh in and share what they feel appears on a given pew. However, with both scholar and student alike, I would want a person who claims to have found discernible language in a pew to point to the precise markings they have in mind and to transcribe what they feel appears therein. What I did not want is for someone to declare that a scholar said some language appears in there somewhere and now the matter is closed. As I've said in a previous video, a university professor is not a high priest who puts forth dogma that can never be questioned. That's simply not how academia works, and no scholar would say that once they speak, no student can ever ask questions or raise objections or investigate the matter for themselves. Again, that's not how academia works. Whatever the case, because a number of the supporters of Richardson and Brown kept asking me where my scholars are, or which scholars I had reached out to, I decided that, if they insist, I can at least send out a few emails to a few different professors. And that's what I did. To each professor I wrote to, I sent 2 images. The first image I attached was of this particular pew from this angle. As you might have noticed, this is precisely the pew Kelly Richardson and I gave competing interpretations for, as I offered a hypothetical Arabic interpretation of the markings, and he offered a solitreo interpretation. This is covered in detail in my previous video. The second image which I attached to each email was this one, which is the same pew, just with some highlights added to guide the eyes, so to speak. Along with those images, I sent each professor the exact same email text, which read as follows, quote, "Forgive the intrusion of this email. In Savannah, Georgia, USA, there is a church, First African Baptist Church, which has pews which were built by slaves. On the outside of the pews which those slaves built are a number of markings. Some have claimed that the markings might be Hebrew, and others have claimed that the markings might be Arabic. Recently, someone has suggested that one pew might even have material from the Quran, but the person who made that suggestion is not any sort of expert in Quranic Arabic. I am writing to ask if you might offer some insight here. I have attached 2 images. The first image simply shows a pew unhighlighted. The second image shows the same pew with highlights as part of one person's attempt to elucidate what might be there. Nota bene, the portion on the right in the second image is in a different color because one person suggested that it might be the end of a different sentence. Could you tell me if, in your opinion, that looks to you or to any of your colleagues like it could be Hebrew, or if it looks like it could be Arabic, and if it might be the latter, if there is any possibility of it resembling anything in the Quran, and if you feel there might be any discernible language in the markings, whether Hebrew or Arabic or something else, are you or anyone you know able to suggest a possible translation? Apologies again for the intrusion. Thanks in advance for any help in this matter. Sincerely, AA." End quote. So, I received multiple replies, and the first email that I'd like to show is the reply I received from Samar Ali, professor of Arabic at the University of Michigan. His response reads as follows, quote, "Thanks for reaching out, and this is super interesting. It looks like Arabic in the West African script, and it could very well be a 3-word snippet of chapter 114 of the Quran, which nearly every Muslim would know and use for ritual prayer. I can't be certain without more context, but it looks like Al-Nas, Ilahil Nas, humanity, the God of humanity, from the middle of that chapter. The whole text of chapter 114 is very short. In the name of God, merciful to all, compassionate to each, I seek refuge with the Lord of humanity, the King of humanity, the God of humanity, who whispers in the hearts of humanity, of jinn and humanity. Besides prayer, it's used in stressful or frightening situations to summon God's protection. Let me know if I can be of any further help." End quote. So while this professor, Samar Ali, said he is not certain, he does say that it looks like it could be a West African rendering of a few words from the last chapter of the Quran, precisely the chapter I had appealed to when I proposed an Arabic reading for this pew. Also worthy of note, his point that this text was memorized and recited in particular by those in stressful or frightening situations could loan itself well to the idea of this being a text which certain slaves had memorized. Now let me show you another couple of emails, in particular one with a more definitive answer. This one is from Geoffrey Kahn, who is the current Regius Professor of Hebrew at Cambridge in England. The Regius Professor, or Regis if you want, you can say Regis. The Regius Professorship of Hebrew at Cambridge is a Hebrew chair established by the King of England 480 years ago. So this is a serious Hebraist, and he also studies and teaches Arabic. So Professor Khan's initial reply to my email was as follows, quote, "Thank you very much for your message and for the photos of the pews in Savannah. The writing is Arabic and contains verses 2 and 3 from the final chapter or surah of the Quran. The text visible in the photo reads in Arabic, Sovereign of mankind, the God of mankind. When do you think this was written on the pews? Was it written by the slaves who built it? Best wishes, Joffrey," end quote. So I wrote back to Professor Khan with the following, quote, "Greetings, Professor Khan. Thank you very much for your reply. Regarding your question, I do not know for certain when the markings were made. The only thing I have is the church's oral tradition, which posits that the same slaves who made the pews were the ones who made those markings. Ergo, assuming that is correct, the markings would date to the 1850s. I really appreciate you sharing your conclusion regarding what appears in those markings. Forgive me if this question is somewhat redundant, but just to be clear, would you say it is definitely Arabic and not Hebrew? The context of my question is the alternate suggestions which have floated around, some positing that the markings should be Arabic and others positing that the markings should be Hebrew. Sincerely, AA," end quote. In response to that, Professor Khan wrote a second reply, which read in part as follows, quote, "The writing is clearly Arabic and is clearly from the Quran, the final surah, Surat al-Nas. It is certainly not Hebrew," end quote. Now, seeing how Richardson, Brown, and others treated the alleged positions of Bunis and Katz, can you imagine how they would react if Cambridge's Hebrew chair said that the markings are clearly Hebrew and certainly not Arabic? I think we can all agree that they would declare that the debate is finished and the matter is closed. So this begs the question, now that I have an email from Cambridge's Regius Professor of Hebrew saying that the markings are clearly Arabic and certainly not Hebrew, should I play the same game? Should I say that the debate is closed and that mere students cannot say anything in response? Of course not. The reason why is because, as I said, that is not how academia works. No scholar would want me going around telling people that they cannot ask questions, or that they cannot raise objections, or that they cannot investigate the matter for themselves. This email does not have to end the discussion, and it especially should not be a tool, used to try to silence students of language. And, to drive this point home, let me share a third email. This one is from Mohsen Gudarzi, an assistant professor of Near Eastern Studies at the University of Minnesota. His email takes a different approach. His email reads in part as follows, quote, "Thank you for your email. I've looked at the images carefully, and I don't believe they contain Arabic writing. Now, it is not impossible for the markings to represent a highly cursive, idiosyncratic, and or local form of Arabic script. Someone with expertise in West African Islam could be a better judge of this. Nor is it impossible to read into them certain recognizable phrases from the Quran. I can read into them 2 phrases, in fact. But these would constitute imposition of a text upon the markings, which can be done basically with any set of sufficiently complex traces," end quote. Now, I imagine at this point, some might be thinking, wait, what? Why would you share that email? You should have ended it with the email from the professor at Cambridge. But I would prefer that we at least try to be somewhat intellectually honest. Moreover, I think Professor Gudarzi's email is helpful. There is a real possibility of an imaginative mind making connections based on familiar features and patterns while looking at something which is actually random or naturally occurring. And one can read up on, things like pareidolia and apophenia for more on this possibility. Finally, let's be honest. What sorts of replies we might get from certain professors can also be influenced by what precise images are shown, how those images are highlighted, and how the questions are worded. So there are multiple layers of interpretation and influence at play in these exercises. For example, try writing to different professors with this image, without any highlights, noting that some claim Hebrew appears on the pew and others claim Arabic appears on the pew, while also clearly saying up front that one other possibility is that these are just random or naturally occurring markings, like medullary rays or scratches, made at random. I think we all know that we're unlikely to get too many replies declaring that to clearly be Hebrew or Arabic if that approach is taken. On that note, I hope everyone enjoyed this discussion on the recent appeals to scholars And I really am looking forward to the comments of others, and I'm looking forward to see where this discussion goes from here. On that note, God bless.